I want to talk to you though about doses, because I'm sure you get this question. Well, what's a good TRT dose? It's kind of like the question of how do I lose weight? It's like, dude, this is a drawn out conversation. How do you determine a good TRT dose? Because I see guys going, oh, I'm going to cruise at 300. I'm like, brother, that's not cruising. That's just staying on. That's too high. You know, what factors do you look at? How do you determine and dial in a person's actual dose? Because that's not a simple yes or no quick answer that people ask, you know? So what do you get in with that? And do you ever recommend an anastrozole or aromacin or anything like that for people on TRT?
I love this topic because this is like the more nitty gritty stuff, and this is the stuff that's actually practical. So my full TRT 101 book is like an instruction manual on my approach to this. Like I've just basically went, look, there's no cookie cutter approach that works for everyone, but there's a template. There's a template. And that's what I've tried to make as easy to understand as people. So I wrote it like an instruction manual that used to come with like Nintendo 64 games when I was a kid. I was like, this is the kind of instruction manual that should come with TRT. So everything that I'm going to say is kind of borrowed out of there. So I've got my own biases. I've got my own perspectives. I don't like pharmaceutical drugs. And that's just a bias that I'm well aware of, but I don't like pharmaceutical drugs because I don't like things that work on the body. I like things that work with the body. Because when it comes to pharmaceuticals, you're pushing one aspect of the body in a certain direction, and the body is going to compensate around that. Plus, what you're trying to achieve in terms of one thing, you might actually cause problems with other things down the track that we don't know. So my approach, like some people need pharmaceuticals. If you've got, if you're sick and you've got issues going on, then cool. Like if you've got a massive infection, you fucking take the antibiotics. But in general, if we're looking to be like, okay, well, what should a man do to be his healthiest? And I'm sure people are going to cry in the comments. I'm not going to read them. Send me an email if you want to cry about it. But my perspective on it is that if we are giving you the optimal amount of testosterone in a delivery mechanism that is going to most closely represent your optimal natural production, then you shouldn't need a pharmaceutical drug to control your estrogen. That's the ideal perspective that we're looking at. The problem that we have, and this is kind of where I think the nuance is that I don't think there's a set number that is physiological or super physiological. Because if I have a guy who's insulin resistant and 60 years old and alcoholic, what's going to be physiological for him is going to be very different than what is physiological for 21-year-old Giga Chad who's doing everything right. So I think sometimes the issue with guys is they're taking too much or the protocol's wrong. But I also think the other side of the equation is some guys aren't taking enough. And I think there's way too much conversation about being like, you're taking too much, you're taking too much, you're taking too much. Some guys are taking too little. They're leaving stuff on the table. They're not actually optimizing their testosterone levels. So how do you find the Goldilocks spot? I think that firstly, you have to outsource it to someone who's not emotionally involved in the outcome of this. You need someone who can supervise it, who has your best interest at heart, as opposed to their financial interest at heart. And they're not going to be making emotional reactive decisions. So you need to outsource this. But the person who's outsourcing it, my approach is that when you start someone on TRT, you're kind of throwing a dart at the dartboard. And if you hit the bullseye, sick. But I think kind of what we're aiming for is the ring around the bullseye, and then we can move it into the bullseye based on the first blood test. So assuming that we've got someone who's an average responder, and assuming that, that they've got average SHBG levels and that, everything's kind of been checked and their health's good, I think to start someone off, you want to shoot for about the top of the reference range. And again, people are going to cry being like, the reference range is this, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I know. I agree. The reference range is bullshit. But the top of the range, if you've been hypergonadal for decades or your whole life, you can't just shoot straight up to double the top of the range. Your body's going to go, what the fuck is this? You're going to get a bunch of side effects. You're not going to be able to actually manage water retention. Your nipples are going to get sensitive. You're going to get acne. It's just like basically fast tracking puberty over 5 years into like 3 weeks. Like not going to work.
Yes.
So
absolutely,
I like shooting for the top of the range. And in Australia, we use the picomole per liter range, which depending on the lab you get might be 6 to 25 or 8 to 30 if you're lucky. But I like to shoot for like a 25 to 30 total testosterone, which will usually give you a free testosterone of about 6 to 800, which for us is like the top of the range. Now, I can't convert the units off the top of my head. That's why I'm just using the range as like an arbitrary kind of, like flag post here that we can talk about. So I like to shoot for the top of the range. and then let that settle in for a few months. Let the body adjust to having double or triple the testosterone levels it's had for a long time, and then look at titrating up from there. Because your body needs time to adjust. You can't just shoot straight for the finish line. If you're like, hey, I want to learn to drive a car, I've been driving this piece of shit Suzuki Swift my whole life. You don't just go straight for the Lambo, because you're gonna crash it and spin it around the corner. And it doesn't mean that the Lambo is a bad car. It just means that you need to learn how to drive it. The amount of time that guys will say, oh, I've got on TRT and now I can't control my temper anymore. I'm like, dude, you never had a temper in the first place. You weren't under control. You were placid. Now you've actually got some fire. And yeah, no shit, you don't know how to handle it because you just jacked yourself through the stratosphere. So I think shooting for the top of the range, and in general, what I put in the book, I like 150 a week as a starting dose because it's just easy to divvy up. If it's 250 milligram per mil, that's 0.3 twice a week or 0.2 3 times a week. It just splits up. It's just easy to do. And then I like to titrate up in, again, you want to go for an increment that is actually easily divisible. So generally it's 5 milligrams per shot. And I like to work up in increments of, generally 20 to 30 milligrams a week. And if we're fine tuning, like 10 to 15 milligrams a week every 3 to 4 months. And if you look at it and go, okay, if you're going to start at 150 and then you're going to end up at, let's say, 200, for example, and you go 150 to 175 to 200, and you do that for 3 months and then another 3 months and another 3 months. Because of how the half-life is building up in your body, if you're using cypionate or enanthate, which most people are doing, you're kind of on a pretty gradual incline anyway, because it takes, 8 to 12 weeks for it to build up in your body. And then you're pushing it up again a little bit, and then you're pushing it up again a little bit. So you're being patient and giving your body time to adjust. But I have found that therapeutically, guys do the best on TRT between the top of the reference range and double the top of the reference range. That's like the optimal dosing for some guys. Now, and in general, I find that how good your baseline health is and your age are the two determining factors of where you should be within those goalposts. So if you're 21 and you're super healthy and you're doing everything right, you might do better at double the top of the range because that's where you should be peaking. Whereas if you are in your 40s and 50s and maybe you're a bit off track, but you're getting your shit together and you've got some extra body fat to lose and you got to kind of clean up the diet, but you're kind of getting yourself on track, maybe the top of the range is good for you now, and you might need more in the future, but you might not. So I've got plenty of younger guys who do well at the top of the range or even, still within the range. And I've got plenty of older guys who do better at double the top of the range too. They're the outliers. But I find that that's a pretty good marker for how this stuff tends to work. And the most important thing that we can do when we're measuring someone's hormone values when you're moving up in the dose is measuring all the blood work together, measuring the blood pressure, seeing how their sleep is. If they track their sleep, that's cool as well to look at, but I don't really use all the gizmos and shit. But like, if you jack the testosterone dose up too high, a lot of the time they're going to start, sweating at night. Their central nervous system is going to be overstimulated. They're not going to sleep properly. They might get a bit of acne. They might get a bit of agitation, but a lot of the time their blood pressure will go up. Sometimes their liver enzymes will jack. Sometimes their blood viscosity will jack up. Like sometimes you can get some peaks in the blood work to go, oh no, we've got a signal that you've crossed into supraphysiological territory here. But it's also very important that guys aren't afraid to push their levels up a little bit, and they're not afraid of testosterone because like testosterone is good for you up until it's not.
Right.
So it's important to go, if we want to optimize testosterone production, if you shut down your natural production, if you're taking 150 a week or 200, you're just to shut down. So you don't want to leave something on the table if you've come in to make this intervention, but you don't want to shoot your levels too high for the sake of, oh, I want to be more masculine, I want to be more jacked, I want to be more this. It's like you should maybe do some martial arts and go to the gym and work on your mental health. That's kind of what you need. So it's case by case. It's different for each person, but that's my kind of general rule of thumb.